Good evening, Facebook. If you are also subscribing to our CN Centre, you would have seen me on there. So CN Centre of Metaphysics, because I've just done a card reading for the coming week. And I thought while I'm out here doing the odd video that I might actually share a reading. Now this was sort of inspired because on Friday I sat down with Joe from Avalon by Nature and we talked about my forthcoming book, Contemporary Witchcraft, Foundational Practices for a Magical Life. Now I've actually had copies of this book since late last year, even though it's not going to be available officially until end of July, August this year. But being the author, I'm able to get pre-ordered copies through Moon Books. So drawing inspiration from my little chat with Jo, which she will be loading up on her Facebook page or her website, Avalon by Nature, at some stage, I thought I might just share a little bit about this forthcoming book. Okay, on the back cover I've written, there is an abundance of approaches to witchcraft and modern Wicca today, with many encouraging an anything goes approach, opposed to what Gerald Gardner, the founder of modern witchcraft, set out. Contemporary Witchcraft, Foundational Practices for a Magical Life offers an alternative for the seeker who wishes to gain a deeper understanding of a more traditional approach to the craft. By tapping into the essence of the teachings handed down by Gardner and later Alexanders, this book provides the reader with invaluable tools and techniques that will enable them to set a foundation upon which to build their ongoing magical and spiritual practice, regardless of whether the seeker is interested in joining a coven or not. Contemporary witchcraft is about dedication and devotion in order for the greater mysteries to be revealed. Contemporary witchcraft, a foundational practices, foundation for magical life, I can't even read this evening, offers an insight into how the non-initiate can achieve this in their own practices. So when I was wanting to write my own version, I guess, of a 101 book, I do hate the title, a foundational book, I wanted something based on probably how I was taught, in that I still use some of the techniques, or a lot of the techniques actually, that I was trained in back in the late 90s. So they're still, so that's 20, nearly 30 years ago. And they have sort of set the foundations to how I view things. And this is something that I personally see missing from the various practices of the craft today. And there are a lot of differences in approach, and I acknowledge that. So I don't want to come across too much of a, grumpy old witch. But I do feel that there is a lack of understanding, that people were so keen to basically throw the baby out with the bath water, and in doing that, I suppose there's almost like a lack of substance to what they're actually doing. They may not realise that, but later down the track, will you be still doing the same rites and practices that you are today? In this book, I have sort of addressed things that I have seen on the internet and social media being bandied about, largely by non-initiates, offering an alleged expert opinion on stuff which by and large is, I wouldn't say secret initiate training, but somewhere along the lines when the first initiates decided to break their oaths and make some of the teachings a bit more available in the Western world, there's been a lot of misinterpretations and misconceptions because you've only been released part of the information, not all of the information. And one in particular is the Wiccan Read, and there's a number of versions to it, and you can get people from newbies and seekers who maybe have read one book or a blog post and believe that in Hamnanders they will means basically you have to be vegetarian, you have to live a certain lifestyle so your actions are not harming anyone or anything. And that's sort of led on to modern Wicca being perceived as fluffy, shall we say, by some other hardcore practitioners, or allegedly hardcore practitioners. And the truth is that what's been depicted these days as Wicca is not anywhere close to what Gardner and Alexander's actually taught or practiced. It's been, can I say, watered down. It's been made accessible for a lot of people, but in doing that, it's always sort of like it's a double-edged sword. It's taken a lot of the truer aspects to what Gardner and Sanders were about out of it, which is a little bit unfortunate, because then it's sort of led to this misconception that Wicca, as a catch-all phrase these days, it's being used as, represents something which doesn't reflect the older teachings. It's interesting to note, and I mentioned this in the book, that Gardner and also Sanders never called themselves Wiccans, and there's also very few initiates, particularly in England, maybe a few more these days, but very few true initiates, maybe I shouldn't say true, initiates who actually call themselves Wiccan. Gardner always wrote that he practiced witchcraft, he was a witch, and his style of witchcraft, the people who followed it were of the Wicca. This also leads to sort of the discovery or the understanding that the word Wicca is actually mispronounced. If you go back to their etymological, I think that means the history of the words, Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, which means male witch, is an Anglo-Saxon word, and it should be witcher. And witchy, W-I-C-C-E, was the female version of it. And that's quite important to keep in mind, because English today, modern day English, is a non-gendered language, so it's not like French in particular, which has masculine and feminine nouns and verbs and words. English doesn't have masculine and feminine, so a witch is a witch, it's non-gendered. But the Anglo-Saxon did have masculine and feminine words, and this is where we get witcher and witchy. And it sort of contradicts some of the comments some people make when they're slagging off Wicca, saying that they're not a Wiccan witch, which I suppose if you interpret that Wicca means witch, it just means that you're not a witch. Or if you're saying you're a Wiccan witch, well then it's saying that you're a witch. So that's quite interesting to just keep in mind when you're trying to differentiate between witch and Wicca. And as I said, a lot of what's put out in the media, or social media in particular, as Wicca actually isn't. It's more sort of modern day paganism. And this is something that's whether I should be bothering with titles these days, but when we name something, we own it. And I think at the end of the day, that is important. If you want to call yourself a Wiccan, if you want to call yourself a witch, I feel basically it's your practice, that's fine. I'm not here to lecture you. Even in my book, I'm not here to, hopefully I don't lecture anybody in my book. I'm just giving you ideas of how I practiced, what my initial teachings were. But I think it's really important to know what the word witch or Wicca or Wiccan means to you. Now, we can get into a big debate about whether witchcraft is a religion, whether witches are religious or not, but I didn't want to do that tonight. I just wanted to pop on, and what I thought I might do is actually just read the table of contents, because I haven't actually looked at this book since I sent it off to Moon Books to be printed like this. Maybe I should have. And so the book's actually divided into two parts. There's part 1, which is a background, and part 2, which is practical. And then I've got an appendix. So it starts off with, I think there's 8, 10. This is how long I've been since I've looked at the manuscript. 10 lectures that, or essays, probably the more appropriate word, that I have written over the years that are based around questions I usually get asked in my training circles or online. So we're starting off with probably how did witchcraft today originate, with a brief history of modern witchcraft. And it is a brief history. All the different influences of Gardner, of Sanders, their contributions, and how we've sort of come to it today. And I feel it's important, even if you aren't following a tradition or you've got your own practice, that you're not really interested in Gardner or Sanders or that lineage, to know where you've come from, because Gardner is important. Even if you are doing your own practice, rightly or wrongly, he was the first person who publicly called himself a witch. There might be some other people who didn't like that idea, who then sort of got onto the media themselves to call themselves witches. But Gerald Gardner, was the first person to call himself a witch. Up to that time, as far as I'm aware of, no one actually publicly called themselves a witch. They were accused of witchcraft, or they might have confessed to witchcraft under torture, being tortured during the witch burnings, but no one actually called themselves publicly a witch until Gardner came along. Then I have a section on what is contemporary witchcraft, and I'm sort of explaining where I'm coming from, why I'm not calling what I practice Wicca, initiatory Wicca, hereditary Wicca, all the other different terminologies that you can hear today, and outlining some of the common beliefs that you can find within contemporary witchcraft. Then I discuss the read and the read of the wiki, and sort of explain what I said right at the beginning, that "and it harm none, do as they will" is not anything binding or set in stone. Following on from that, I have an essay on one's highest ideals, which appears in the Charge of the Goddess, written by Doreen Valente, to strive for one's highest ideals. What does that actually mean? Then, having read those or discussed those 6 points, a question for you: is contemporary witchcraft the right path for you? A time to pause to think. Because there are so many different spiritual paths or religious paths out there these days. And I think it's wanting something to carry you throughout your life, as opposed to a hobby. You want something that sort of, again, sets the foundations. Then you need to sit down and say, where does this sit? Does it gel with me? My version, or my understanding of witchcraft, is that it's a religion. Religion is, or religious, these words are very sort of loaded these days. But how I see the craft, I believe in a higher force beyond the self, a god and a goddess. So we move on to working and understanding the role of deity and how it appears in the craft. I also talk about the differences between the southern hemispheres and the seasonal wheel of the year. Now, I haven't gone into great detail about the seasonal wheel because if you know me, you'll know that I've actually written a book, Dancing the Sacred Wheel, which is about the wheel of the year. With me living in the southern hemisphere, the next section, the practical, though I do cater for the northern hemisphere, I have put us southerners first. So unlike most of the books that you pick up today, where they talk about how you cast circles and the rituals and your rituals and how to go about calling in the quarters, they will do it northern hemispheric, and then there's usually a note, an end note or a footnote or a PS. If you're living in the southern hemisphere, you do it the other way around. I've done it so us southerners know how to cast your circle. And I'm not that cruel for the northern hemisphere people that you just get a byline. I do sort of explain a little bit more and cater for you as well. So moving to the practical section. There are a number of basic foundational practices that I still follow through today. They have always been the core of my spiritual practice, whether it's the craft, magic, or anything else. And the first is journaling, keeping a magical diary or just basically a working journal of what you've done. That's very important. So it forms as a marker for when you go back, especially if you're doing spell works or rituals and you're wanting to bring something into your life or to record your dreams, and you're starting to get synchronicities and things popping up all the time. It's really good to have something you can go back to as opposed to just keeping it all in your head. How I write my magical journal, I set out the time, date, any astrological phases or happenings in the cosmos, planets in alignment that I think may have an impact, what incense I've burnt, what mood I'm feeling in, how did I feel before, during and after my ritual, what did I actually do? If I'd done a meditation, did I get any visions or insights? If I did a card reading, what were the results of that? So they can be quite detailed. And this is my journal. This is separate to my Book of Shadows. So my journal is a working book. Anything of importance that comes to me through my ritual workings and recordings that I want easy access to, I would then move that into my Book of Shadows. So that's the first point, is the importance of journaling. The second point is meditation and visualization. We've got to learn to turn off that monkey mind, being able to focus, being able to hold a visualization. These are basic techniques that you need to cast your circles, to create spells, to perform any sort of magical workings. And I give you 5 various exercises to help strengthen those abilities. Then we talk about the magical power of the witch. What does it actually mean? We're talking about the energy being raised and how it can differentiate between other psychic or intuitive energies. How to sort of awaken this energy within yourself, to sense it, to ground yourself, and then to enhance it even further through candle visualizations or utilizing the 3, the meditation, the visualization, and being able to harness your witch power to something more practical. Then we move into casting the circles. Breathing in the cosmic energy, what's it all about? Elemental placements. Now I'm writing from Adelaide, so my placements of the elements may be completely, Elizabeth, talking about contemporary witchcraft. So my elemental placements and the reasons why I place the elements in certain quarters may be completely different to you, and that's okay. How I was taught and how I resonate in my practice, even though I have and I still call it a semi-sussed lineage or initiation rite is that, and I suppose I don't know if it's an Australian thing, but I feel the connection to our place very important. And this has caused a number of disagreements, shall we say, over the years with Northern Hemisphere counterparts, and also probably more traditional lineage holders as well. I do feel that sense of place is very important. Now, what that means to you could differ to what it means to me. But to me, it means, okay, I'm practicing sort of a Northern Hemispheric, not even just Northern Hemispheric, an English or a British orientated or originated spiritual practice or religion on the other side of the world, on a land that's been inhabited for, I don't know, we're looking at 10,000, 50,000 years. So that's very important to keep in mind. So I'm sort of trying to blend or work my magics in a way that is appropriate. So it feels right for me. It feels right to the gods that are in alignment with my tradition, and also the ancient inhabitants of this country, if that makes sense. So the elements, for example, elements are everywhere. They're the building blocks of the universe. But how they appear and the directions they come from and how they resonate to you in relation to either the land that you're working on or how they swirl around can be completely different. I've always been comfortable with the association of East for air, rising sun. You get that through ancient Egypt, you get it through the Hermetic societies, and also in craft. It's the place of beginnings is in the East. The sun rises every day. So that means in the West, the sun is setting. So we've got East with air, and west of me is the Vincent Gulf. So that's water. And again, a lot of the ancient teachings of other cultures and spiritual groups, it's over the waters, which is technically the land of the dead. So where the sun dies in the evening, it's usually water. North of me, we've got the deserts, we've got the equator, we've got the northerly winds, which are really hot in our summers. So for me, it's logical to place fire there. South of me, Antarctica, it's cold, southerly winds, so that represents Earth to me. Now, if you are, say, on the eastern seaboard, you might use or place water in the east because you've got the Tasman Sea or the Pacific Ocean. You may place air in the west because that's the direction our wind currents come from. Or you may place earth in the west because that's the rest of the continent from where you are. Likewise, if you're in Perth, you may put earth in the east because that's where the rest of the continent comes from. If you're up north in the tropics, around Darwin, I don't know, maybe you just get rid of all the elemental quarters at all. It's entirely up to you. Again, same with when it comes to the labels of whether you call yourself a witch or a Wiccan. When it comes to the elements, if you're not following a tradition, if you're solitary or wanting to do a study group with friends, as long as the elemental placement, if you're working with the elements, means something to you, then you can put whatever element in each quarter that you want to. The most important thing, however, is because in my tradition, the elements, again, are the building blocks. So build up a relationship with the elements. Know what air is like. Standing at the end of the jetty with the wind's coming through. knowing what fire feels like. We've just gone through summer, so I think most of us can understand the heat or the intensity of fire. Water tends to be a little bit difficult here in Adelaide. We haven't had rain for a while, so it's the morning showers that I sort of hone into, or the crashing waves down at the beach. And earth. I was very fortunate of growing up in New Zealand, so I am very familiar, even these days, of the smell of the New Zealand bush and the decaying leaf litter and that sort of dankness. And each time I go home, though I haven't been home for a while now thanks to COVID, I like to get out in the bush, so just refresh that sort of sensory memory of earth. Failing that, get some potting mix, or meditate on a cave, or you might have a cave close to you. Again, use your imagination, use what you have around you. So from the elements and the elementals, we move into the magical working tools, what they are, what you need, what you don't need. And I suppose at the end of the day, you don't really need anything. But we tend to like collecting our little pretty shiny things. So I'm sort of giving you an idea as to how I use them, which may or may not be the same as any other initiate within my tradition. But it's just how I've adapted them, especially when it comes to the wand and the athame or the athame, because different traditions, different peoples, different writings, different books, different authors have different opinions as to which quarter they belong to, whether they relate to air or fire. And in the book, I explain my reasoning. Again, these are my opinions as to why I have these particular placements. Then I go into what is ritual. And I guide you through creating your own astral temple, which is really beneficial because a lot of us do not actually have the space or even the time sometimes to actually do a full-blown ritual in our own sacred area, that utilising the astral. This is something, a place you can go to if you're on the bus or on the train, hopefully not when you're at work, but if you find the need to sort of move away from this mundane world, escape into your magical safe space, that can be very beneficial. Then I move into the 4 powers of the Sphinx. Now this is also known as the Witch's Pyramid, the Magician's Pyramid, the Magi Pyramid, and I've concluded this because this seems to be missing these days when it comes to social media, and with everybody wishing to share their spell working and their ritual workings and even their altar. So I thought I would include or remind people of the 4 powers of the Sphinx, to will to know, to will to dare, to keep silent, and the importance of it. And we might be in the 21st century, but I do personally believe that these powers still are just as important today as they had been. Move into working with the moon. We're coming up to a new moon. And one thing that I saw this recently is the exercise for this section is moon names. And again, this is probably more geared to the southern hemisphere, but in the northern hemisphere, it gives you a chance to sort of look at the folk names that are known today, and do they still apply? In the southern hemisphere, majority of the names are actually based in the northern hemisphere, and they have no relevance whatsoever to us. So again, this is almost giving you permission to step outside into your environment and look around. I know I call the March moon harvest moon because it ties in with the autumn equinox, it ties in with the grape harvest. I call the November moon Jacaranda moon because in Adelaide we've got a number of suburbs and streets which are lined with the jacaranda, and even though the jacaranda isn't a native to Australia, I think it's from South Africa, but it's usually November where those beautiful lilac flowers are just dropping. The streets are lined with them, and that's really, really gorgeous. Other moons, I call the February moon usually a fire moon. It's usually our hottest time of the year, though this summer hasn't been all that hot, and last summer our heat came in January. So sometimes these moon names are very flexible. Then other moons, September, we usually start seeing the signs of the blossoms, the almond blossoms. So I call it almond blossom moon. Now it's interesting to note that as far as I'm aware, and I'm not an expert on this area, the local Indigenous people, which are the Kaurna people here in Adelaide, they didn't actually have names for their moons. So this sort of counteracts some of the Northern Hemisphere folk moons that we get, because there are one list of moons, I'm just trying to think what they were, which is actually, or allegedly from, I think they're either a group of Native Americans either close to the Canadian border, or it might actually be a Canadian group of Native peoples. This is where we get the strawberry moon and the worm moon. But then that sort of these days sort of interacted with a lot of the hunter or the colonialist names as well. So what I was saying is that, as far as I'm aware, the Kaurna people didn't have specific moons because their calendars were a little bit different. They sort of observed more of the solstices and equinoxes, and I think their calendar was more based around, they did have stars that they observed, but also animals, migrating animals and birds. So they didn't have, specific name for, say, here we are, an April moon. As I said, I'm not 100% certain on that. There isn't a lot of information that I'm aware of, but if I find out anything to the contrary, I'll let you know. And if you find anything contrary with respect to the Aboriginal peoples, and bearing in mind that there's some 300 different cultural groups within Australia, I'm quite sure that a lot of these people, these cultural groups may have had their different names, so there's no one name that will fit everybody. So that's getting back to working with the moon. Then I've got a section, just a small section on herbs, incenses and colours, the art of psychic defence, and then I talk about spell casting. One thing that I dislike about a lot of the beginner books or the foundational books is that they go straight into spells. And my tradition of witchcraft, it's probably more religious in that we focus more on ritual and communicating with the divine, building up that relationship first, understanding all that foundational practice of how you're casting a circle, getting in touch with the elements, working through with the elements, because I said they are the building blocks. Because everything in the circle with our tools, directions, everything comes back to the elements. And I end the book with a section on living a magical life. So how to put all this together and also live it every day amongst the mundane. So you're not having magical life is only happening on a Thursday afternoon when the coven gets together, or you get together with some friends. You're having a magical life every waking hour of your being. Then the appendix, I've got basic circle casting ritual. This is the bare bones. It gives you an example, gives you a starting point of what you can utilise to get the experience, because when it comes to working the craft, the best way to learn it is by doing. It's not a spectator sport. I talk about the elemental pentagrams, and there's more than just the banishing earth. I do pentagrams with when I cast my circle, so when I close my circle, I do my invoking and banishing elemental pentagrams. This is probably the ceremonial, magicianal, or the high magic aspects that is part of my own ritual practice. I include a self-blessing or self-dedication ritual. There's a recipe to make your own salt scrub or ritual oil if you want to anoint yourself. I've also included a rite that it's my version of Paul Houston's, I don't know if he's called it what I've called it Releasing the Power of the Witch. It's actually, and I can't remember what he's called it in his Mastering Witchcraft book, but it's one rite that I've always resonated with, and I try and do it on a yearly basis. And it's basically saying the Lord's Prayer backwards. And if you're of a certain age, with all the Hammer horror movies, this is something that all Satanists do apparently, is that they say the Lord's Prayer backwards. Now the purpose of that isn't to drag you into Satanism. It's largely because whether we are Christian or not, we live in a Christian society or a Christian-based society, our rules and regulations and lawmakers, whether they're Christian or not, is all heavily influenced by Christianity. So if you're wishing to follow truly an alternative religion or spiritual path, you really need to sort of purge or cleanse yourself first. Then you can start from a clean slate. So it's got nothing about being anti-Christian. All it is sort of giving yourself a clean slate so you can start over again. Because it's really interesting seeing how much Christianity or pseudo-Christian beliefs some people are trying to bring into the craft. And yeah, the witchcraft, especially if you see it as religion, so we've got almost two competing religions. So I call it releasing the power of the witch. So it's basically breaking the chains of a Christian influence so you can start again clearly. And it's really interesting for even people who, like myself, have never really had a Christian upbringing, just to watch or take note of what arises. Do you get the sort of like, oh, I don't know if I can do that feeling already? If I just mentioned saying the Lord's Prayer backwards. If you do, then that's really interesting. And that, to me, would indicate, yes, you need to do the right. And even if you decide that the craft is not for you and you want to, I don't know, return to the Christian folds, that's fine. Again, you've got a clean slate to start all over again from. So I think this rite is beneficial, basically, for everybody. Also in the book, I give you instructions on how to make your own magical robe, if you wish to make an outer garment. There's a glossary, there's information about myself. Moon Books, who's the publisher, do end notes. So these are the notes that I've made right at the end of the book, as opposed to footnotes, which is my personal preference, which are usually at the bottom of the page, but that's publisher's choice. Then I have a bibliography of a number of books that I have utilised or which I have used over the years that have helped form these views, or which you may like to read further. So that is Contemporary Witchcraft, Foundational Practices for a Magical Life. And as I said, it should be released in August this year, but I do have early copies available. I've got them through my Etsy store, Luna Noir Creations, or you can direct message me and I can send you the link. So I hadn't looked at this book for a number of months now, since I sent the manuscript off to Moon Books. So all up, we're looking at close on 250 pages, and just flicking through it, there's a diagram, there's a lot of text. So it's not one of those books where there are more pictures than information. There's, about nearly 30 years of my thoughts on how to help seekers, and I call you neophytes. Again, this is my background is you're a seeker if you're looking. You're a neophyte or a novice if you're starting to take the first step into following a tradition. I don't use other words like baby witch or witchling. I personally feel that those words are degrading and, almost insulting. So it's just me. So that's Contemporary Witchcraft. I'm beginning to waffle now. It's probably time I head inside and put my feet up. I've got work tomorrow. I suppose I should do some domesticated duties in preparation. So I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to Contemporary Witchcraft. Just a few things that I've got coming up that I did mention when I was doing the card reading for the Icene Centre. I've got a couple of workshops coming up in May. One on a weekend on the Saturday the 29th, we're going to do protection bottles. So this is actually making your own protection bottle, and the bottles are quite big. So it's a bottle that you can use for your house, your home, your car, your workspace. And then that's on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday is the practical incense making course. If you want to do both, I'm quite happy to give you a discount or reimburse you a percentage because it's all done through Eventbrite. On the 26th of May, there's the full moon. And at the moment, I've put it on as a live, but I'm beginning to think I might actually hold a ritual here at the Covenstead. So if you are watching and you are interested, it's only going to be open to a small number of people. Then personal message me and I'll let you know. Workshop in June is going to be on spells, amulets and talismans. This has been long waited. I was going to run it last year, but COVID hit, so everything sort of got canned, and I think I was going to run it the year before, but the notes almost ended up being a book, so I hadn't decided whether I was going to put it in book format. Who knows? And the July workshop will be on making, I call them attraction dolls. You can use them as protection, you can use them to bring things into your life. So with all these workshops, majority of the ingredients or the materials that you need will be provided. For the bottles, there's one ingredient that I won't be providing, and that is the connection to you. So that's only your piece of DNA, so I can't provide that. All these events are listed under events, or you can personal message me. I'm open for readings or healings this coming Saturday and also the following Saturday, so the 10th and the 17th. And I think that's about it. I'm also in the process of doing some online courses as well. So when I'll get those finished, who knows? They've been started anyway. Anyway, I'm going to go inside now and do my domesticated journey and duties. I can't even speak straight. So I hope you all had a wonderful long weekend and didn't eat too much chocolate. And until I do another live, we'll see you. Take care. Blessings.